Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Lindsey series. This is the biggest district in Lincolnshire, containing 188 civil parishes. Without further ado, here's today's offering. Welcome back to East Lindsey again, people. Now, when I was planning this run's route, I referred to this one a few times as the awkward one. That's because the shape of it is very, very awkward. You'll see what I mean as we journey around Scamblesby. The East Lindsey series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop, located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like, and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Scamblesby, Skammel's farm. This week in East Lindsey, we're taking on a village I've nicknamed the Awkward One, and the reason is it's simply down to its shape. Scamblesby, when viewed on a map, looks like it's a pretty simple circular walk, but it's anything but. It's actually a long, linear village that stretches for well over half a mile from end to end, and the only saving grace for my route was a rather handily placed public right-of-way. That said, both ends of the village are still awkward to reach. To the south, Mill Lane is a dead end that runs parallel to Goulceby Beck, whilst in the north, the eastern end of Old Main Road is better covered using the car. Awkwardness aside, Scamblesby does have a few interesting bits. The Church of St Martin is the standout feature, located as it is at the highest point of the village. That means there are some pretty astounding views to take in of the Lincolnshire Wolds. You can also get those views from the lower reaches too, because Scamblesby sits in a shallow valley. That means all around the Wolds rise above the horizon. In this one, we'll also be having a look at a former pub called the Green Man, a school and a village hall, as well as taking in the now deserted village of Cawkwell, just up the A153. Awkward it may be, but Scamblesby, it's a lovely place. Come with me, I'll prove it. We begin on South Street in the centre of the village. This is where a couple of holiday cottages and B&Bs can be found if you're a visitor, but the locals have their own building too. This is Scamblesby Village Hall, whose main room can cater for up to 100 people. The hall is the location of a pop-up pub occasionally as well. It's the central meeting place for all the residents out here, so it's the ideal place for one of these. Tick off the awkward one, folks. Scamblesby is done. Now to head north to the main junction within the village, where South Street meets the former route of the A153. At the junction, there's an old phone box in a bad state of repair and a bus stop, but the latter is now disused. Across the road from them both is Scamblesby C of E Primary School. This is one of the main schools in the area. You'll recall that there was no active school in Hemmingby, Asterby or Goulceby, and several other nearby villages also lack one now too. Records show that originally Scamblesby had a national school, erected in 1849. The main building here is 19th century, but a new classroom block was built on the site in 2002. It's westward now as we follow Old Main Road. These cottages are known as Saddler's Row. In times past, Scamblesby would have been important for the making and repairing of saddles. On Watery Lane, we start to make our way to the highest point of the village, where the church is located. On the way, we pass a rather earthworky field. Although historic England knows nothing about this, it could well be linked to the Knights Templar, as in 1185, landowner Roger de Meltoth gave around 20 acres here to them. Later in 1507, Scamblesby was held by Italian historian and priest Polydore Virgil, who moved to England in 1502. The road has now become Church Lane, and here's the vicarage, as if by magic. Bang next door is the church, and like many others in this area, it's built of green limestone. Of particular note in this one is an early Norman pillar used in the rebuilding of its nave. It also contains unusual and ancient poppy head pew ends, which are thought to be of monastic origins. There are two rather pretty monuments too, one to Reading Grantham and the other to Margaret Henry. St Martin's is one of the many churches situated along the Viking Way, so coming to visit it will always have one special added bonus. Well, let me tell you folks that visiting this church here in Scamblesby is worth it if just for the view. When you pull into the car park, you're treated to that, and isn't that just absolutely gorgeous? You're surrounded on three sides here by the Lincolnshire Wolds. Views like that, I suppose, are par for the course in this part of Lincolnshire. So let's move on and see what else this place has got. We're going to exit the churchyard and turn right back onto the road. This will take us back onto the main street and onto Mill Lane. Then we're going to complete the circuit by using a public right-of-way. Now, hopefully, said right-of-way is not muddy. It has been raining, as you can probably tell. No, my luck, it probably will be a little bit muddy, but yeah, I'm used to it by now. We return to South Street, and now it's time to go the other way, southwards. At the junction with Church Lane, South Street becomes Mill Lane. There's a couple of big buildings in this area. Take this absolute beast on the corner, positively monolithic, although it's not a listed structure. Scamblesby Parish only has 3 listed buildings, and 2 of them aren't even in the main village. The rest of this lane is generally bungalows or detached houses, and in a few steps it sweeps its way to the left to become Chapel Lane. Mill Lane continues ahead, but that's a dead end. We'll catch it later. This partially completed house is a former Methodist chapel, last used for religious purposes in 2023. Originally built in 1977, it replaced an earlier Wesleyan chapel on the same site, dating from 1835. The house stands on the edge of Goulceby Beck, which you can just see down there under the road. This next section followed a long walk, a good quarter of a mile or so up to Ings Lane, where a handily placed public right-of-way allowed me to form a loop around the village. This takes us past a farm, backdropped on all sides by the gentle rolling hills that are the Lincolnshire Wolds. Lovely. The path we're on effectively follows the beck for at least half a mile. It crosses the stream soon after the farm and then runs along the edge of a field. Whichever way you look, you have the wolds to admire. Up in the hills at this point is the Red Hill Nature Reserve, notable for the unusual red colour of its soil and underlying chalk. That means that sometimes the beck can be an orangey red, so that's something to look out for here too, if you're walking these hills. You do get a sense of being almost in the middle of nowhere here, but soon the village comes back into view. Next, it's an old pub. This is the former Green Man. It was bought by Richard Bradley and Charles Nickerson in 2019 after it had been closed for 12 months and hadn't been fully open for 2 years. Their intention was to bring it back to life, and they did briefly as a village shop. However, now the building is again up for sale. Rounding off the route, we pass over a stone bridge that transports the old route of the A153 over Goulceby Beck before we come to a couple of businesses in the village centre, including a garage and a crane hire firm called Hewson Smith & Sons. These are their gates. Yeah, so something else that made Scamblesby a little bit awkward in the planning stage was the fact that there was not really anywhere to park the car. I'm currently in what looks to be a parking space. If I just show you this, This is just beyond that gate you've just seen. There we go, look, it looks like a parking space, but you can't park in this. And the reason for that is because when lorries turn out of that yard, they need this space to turn. There you go, you can see, look, keep clear, large vehicle turning. So yeah, it was a bit of a difficult job to find a parking space here in Scamblesby, but I did eventually find one, and that was, of course, just down from the school in the village hall where we started. And that's where I'm heading to now to complete this circuit of the village. But of course there are a couple of things we haven't yet seen. With it being a linear village, I haven't been all the way down to the end of Mill Lane. I will do that though in the car. And we also haven't gone up this main road towards the A153, but again we'll do that on the way out. There is another little hamlet within Scamblesby's boundaries as well, and that's called Cawkwell. We'll catch all of that in the car as we bring this episode to a close. So this is Mill Lane. The rest of it runs for a good half a mile or so into the countryside before becoming a farm track. I do believe you can walk a bit further than its end though via the Viking Way. So did Scamblesby have a mill? Well, yes, it appears it did. I found a little bit of evidence to suggest there was a small windmill with a pointed cap at one time, but it's long since been demolished. Interestingly, this part of the village once turned up some rather interesting pottery too. A single shard of medieval greenware was found at a house called Dalesgarth in 2007, providing a further glimpse back into Scamblesby's past. So I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but Old Main Road is literally just that. This is the old route of the A153. That explains why it's so wide. The new road is known as the Scamblesby Bypass and flanks the village to the west. Its existence means that now traffic travelling from Louth to Horncastle doesn't have to cope with the village anymore. As we already know, Scamblesby's Methodist chapel was on Chapel Lane. That one was Wesleyan, but there was also a primitive chapel in the village at one time. It was on the A153, albeit not on this stretch. It was south of the village on the current A153. Our last job is to head up the A153 and through the hamlet of Cawkwell. This is now a deserted medieval village, but it's still important to Scamblesby's past. When the chancel of St Martin's Church was completely rebuilt in 1890 and the nave rebuilt in 1893, many of the features came from Cawkwell. It used to have a church dedicated to St Peter, which has now been demolished. Cawkwell still has a couple of buildings that are notable, none that are ancient, but among their number is Cawkwell House, a Grade 2 listed building dating from 1825. It's a steep climb through this hamlet because now we're onto the hills we could see earlier. In the next village, the locals knew how to make full use of these gradients around here. Join me next time as we meet a place with a rather humorous sounding name. Thanks for watching this video, folks. Don't forget to like this episode if you haven't already. It really makes a difference with YouTube. If you're new here, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us a share too if you've got friends who'd like it. You can find all the links to my social media accounts below, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee page where you can donate to the channel. Also, if you've enjoyed this episode, have a look at some more videos in this series. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.